Welcome. We are so excited that you are joining us here today for the conversation about digital learning at Benton Community School District, a partnership with Grantwood AEA. So quick introductions, or not. There we go.
I am Annie Upah. I am the Director of Curriculum and Instructional Services at Benton Community. Benton Community is located as a neighboring district to Cedar Rapids for about 330 radius miles. We have 4 different attendance centers spread out. Our towns are, my son lives in one town obviously and travels about 30 miles to school, so that just gives you a little bit of an idea about Benton if you've not heard of it before.
And I'm Lynn Kleinmeyer. I'm a digital learning consultant at Grantwood AEA, which is located in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I have the pleasure of serving Benton Community, not only as their digital learning consultant, but I'm also a proud Bobcat mama. So my kiddos actually go to the school district as well, so it's kind of a win-win. So I get to support these conversations that are happening throughout Benton Community. So obviously that's us. Just a real quick pulse of the room. Kind of knowing who you are. So who are our teachers? Okay. Who are our administrators? Who are, I'm going to go with instructional coaches. Nice. Okay, curriculum directors. Superintendents. I see I got a couple librarians in the house. I see. All right, who did I miss? Other AEA consultants or people serving in a consultancy role? Okay, that kind of helps us know, thinking about the entry points for this conversation and how you might be able to take this conversation back to your home district, because it was a pretty exciting one. So where it all began. So it actually all began with a refresh and a request. So do you want to kind of explain what's going on?
So this is my second year serving in the role of Curriculum and Instructional Services Director. And when I came to this role in the district, I had previously taught in the district, served as a teacher leader in the district. My superintendent said, "Hey Anna, the board wants to have a conversation about digital learning, because we were making over $100,000 purchase in technology at that July board meeting." And he said, "So you're it. I want you to talk about how digital learning is used throughout the district. And I know that you've only been on the job for about 10 days, but this board meeting, I need you to create something, generate something, and talk to the board about digital learning." And I'll tell you, like, it's really hard to come into a position and find pictures and things like that to make it fun and engaging for a school board in the middle of July, because there were kids and buildings for me to gather information from. But anyways, after that board meeting, we had a conversation administratively about what is the vision for digital learning at Benton Community. And in that conversation amongst administrators in the middle of July, we pulled in Grantwood and said, "Join us for this conversation," because our board is asking a lot of really great questions about digital learning, how devices are used, what learning looks like with digital tools throughout the district. So that's really where it started, is at the board table. And for those of you who are familiar with working with boards, when something starts at the board table, you act pretty immediately, so that way you can best understand what the vision of your board members and essentially school community is.
So as part of that whole conversation, we had a little bit of an opportunity, because there were some questions about the technology, the device purchases, and how they were being leveraged around the district. And then it kind of surfaced that there might be a need to shift thinking about the technology plan that the district had put together. So we really kind of started shifting a conversation, and we really kind of dove into what is digital learning.
And I would say that how one of those big shifts came from the technology plan that was in place when I entered my role had a clip art picture of a desktop computer on the front, and it had an end year, so it had a start year, I think, of 2007 and an end year of 2012. Remember I said I had only been in the district for 2 years, so when I got handed this document, I was like, whoa, this has a clip art image of a desktop computer. I don't even know if some of our youngest learners would know what this is, right? Because it's just not, it was dated. And on the front it said technology plan. When I opened that technology plan and started going through that technology plan, it was a lot of information about hardware. It was a lot of information about a purchasing plan. But there wasn't a lot of information about learning, a lot of information about expectations or implementation. And so that's when our conversation around that administrative table, like Lynn said, really had to shift to taking a technology plan and turning it into a plan that's centered on learning.
Because what is digital learning? It's learning. And it's leveraging the technology that you have in a very, very intentional way. And so kind of keeping in mind what we had for the universal constructs, thinking about the professional learning plan of the entire school district, it was really about shifting that conversation. And so I took that opportunity because maybe it's my background as a former reading teacher, but words matter. And so I really took that moment, not just because my title is Digital Learning Consultant, it wasn't about me, but it was about shifting a conversation and helping people be able to shift that mindset. So taking it from a conversation about the technology plan to really about the digital learning plan. And so it was an opportunity for us to really start to shift mindsets across the entire district about learning and not just about the tech itself. It wasn't about the device, it was what you could do with the device. So Anna and I were kind of tasked with revisiting and recreating the digital or technology plan into a digital learning plan. So obviously we have this linked and we're going to reference several times throughout. So this was kind of born, and it was kind of the most opportune time because last October, Iowa launched their own digital learning plan that is based off of the National Ed Tech Plan. So it was kind of a perfect opportunity where we could bring together all of these different conversations and have them converge in a very meaningful way. And it was fantastic because we had a starting point for the conversation of what it could look like.
I had the opportunity the year prior to serve on a statewide committee tasked with reviewing the Iowa Digital Learning Plan. So when I went to iTech at this time last year, it was last year, right? Yeah. This time last year, and it really got unveiled, that Iowa Digital Learning Plan. I was able to bring connections prior to that visit to iTech to our team of people back at Benton to say, hey, this is work this is moving in the right direction, this transition from a technology-focused plan to a digital learning plan, and here is my evidence. I was able to cite some of the things that were going on in that Iowa Digital Learning Plan as far as not only those headings that are listed there, those chapters or sections of the Iowa Digital Learning Plan, but also those stories. Should we show the video?
Yeah.
Director of the Iowa Department of Education. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person today, though I appreciate the opportunity to share a few brief recorded remarks. First and foremost, I'm thrilled that Iowa now has a tailored, state-specific digital learning plan, which builds upon the National Ed Tech Plan. I appreciate that this plan's focus has an emphasis on learning, teaching, leadership, assessment, and infrastructure. I also appreciate all of the work over the past year that has gone into building connections between these key areas and the education context here in Iowa. I'm also inspired by the great partnerships that have supported the development of our state digital learning plan and made this work possible. I especially appreciate the critical role Iowa State Aid System has played in the process, along with the work of REL Midwest. So both the AEAs and the Durrell for partnering with the department and being a part of this work and making it happen for our state. This statewide digital learning plan will be another important tool in helping our state achieve the Future Ready Iowa goal, which is that by 2025, 70% of Iowans in the workforce will have education or training beyond high school. So again, I'm sorry that I can't be with you today in person to share this exciting learning opportunity at the conference and to participate in the official rollout of the state plan. But again, thank you for all you've done for Iowa students and for taking the time to engage in this critical work. Have a great day. Thank you.
So if you haven't had the opportunity to check out the Iowa Digital Learning Plan, I would highly encourage you to take a visit to that site. There are a lot of great videos put together by PBS that are included in that Iowa Digital Learning Plan, videos tailored to each of those sections.
So I'm just curious, how many of you have had a chance to look at the Iowa Digital Learning Plan? I would definitely, like Anna said, encourage you to do that. So this is all good and great, but this is not Lynn and Anna's plan. This was not us. It was very intentional that we wanted this to become a Benton conversation. And so we didn't want it just to be us doing the work and thinking it was really awesome. We wanted to really empower the teachers of Benton community to be part of this work and to have their input and their insight and have it be part of their everyday conversation. So with that in mind,
like Lynn said, we identified teachers to be part of the digital learning team at Benton Community. We were really intentional to make sure that teachers that were part of the team or invited to be part of the team represented teacher populations from across our district. So we had primary teachers, we had secondary teachers, we had intermediate teachers, we had people who were, I would say, self-identified and identified by peers in the district as champions of digital learning. We had people who were self-identified and identified by peers in the district as resistors to digital learning, all part of the team, very intentionally, because we wanted the clearest perspectives around the table that would represent what we were going to be meeting out in the buildings that we were going to take this information to. And again, we needed all of these perspectives to help build a comprehensive vision that represented what everyone at Benton felt about digital learning, not just what Lynn and Anna felt about digital learning. At Benton Community, our PLC process is really around data teams. We're very specific and use the data teams process very regularly. And so we knew that when we entered this work, we needed to pull in data. We needed to find evidence. We needed to do some pre-assessment. So when Lynn and Stacy came to our admin team, we talked about Bright Bites. And if you haven't used the Bright Bite survey, I highly recommend tapping into that information. So what we did is we gave our staff, our students, and our parents, our families, the Bright Bite survey. And as a team, the digital learning team, we worked through that data, just like we would work through the data teams process with student data. And we identified, or we looked at those 4 core areas: classroom, access, skills, and environment, and had a conversation about where do we start? What is the data telling us?
And that was very intentional because there were so many different places to really dive into the conversation. We wanted to be very intentional about the focus, but we also wanted to be very, very intentional about calling together this team and building their capacity. Because we didn't want to just pull together this team and say, all right, friends, we're writing a digital learning plan. We wanted to start with that foundational why, but we also wanted to have that foundational conversation of what the work really was going to be all about. And so you'll see that there's this link here that's going to take you, and I'm going to show you a couple things that I want to highlight and point out. But this actually, Anna and I, we've shared everything, all of our agendas, every activity, everything that we did, every conversation we had with this team in order to build their capacity.
I think one other thing before we go any farther, it's important to know as you kind of get an idea of the background to this work, when this conversation started, Benton was one of the earlier schools to adopt a one-to-one, and we adopted one-to-one with iPads. We're still one-to-one 7-12 with iPads. And when the buzz throughout the district started that, oh, we're having a digital learning team and we're going to talk about technology in our classrooms, that it was really all going to be about a device overhaul. And that, oh, we're going to get new devices, we're not going to have iPads anymore. And so it was really important for us to look at the data, collect the data, look at the data, and see that a device conversation is not what we needed to have. That's exactly what that data told us, which led into building capacity in our team about what was the conversation if it wasn't about devices.
So one of the first things that we did is we just started off with this a very intro conversation. I mean, super low tech. Just simply wrote the question, what is digital learning on the board? And as you look at some of the responses, it's that idea of not just tech for tech's sake. It's things about enhancing learning. It's about combining technology with instruction, supporting skills, and of course, my little heart was going, yes. So then we asked the follow-up question of, well, what does this have to do with instruction? And then they were taking it to that next level of, this is how we really help find relevance, this is how we get insight with students, this is how we change the student learning experience, which was super exciting. But we wanted to make sure that the conversation was very, very grounded. So when you go into our digital learning team meeting minutes, Anna and I met and kind of planned out and kind of thought very intentionally about what are our learning opportunities, what are the pieces of the puzzle that we need to maybe kind of have some further conversation, how can we have this team really truly be interactive and own this information. So we had our first meeting in October after the original Bright Bites, and you'll notice, I mean, we went all the way through. Each time that we met, we had about 3 hours together, but really starting with setting our purpose from the very beginning, going all the way through actually having them explore the Bright Bites data. Took 45 minutes, guided them through. Anna and I picked certain components that we were able to then highlight and walk them through, asked them to look at their and take away with their insights and the potential implications. And then obviously we kind of knew that the 4 C's were maybe going to come up, so really having them have that introduction and really diving deeply into the 4 C's, having a protocol, because I do love a good protocol, guiding conversation. And then this, I think, was a really important piece of the puzzle. It's kind of the now what, so what. And so do you want to talk a little bit about this part?
Yeah, so this pocket of excellence, really stemmed from a conversation I was having with someone on the Iowa Digital Learning Plan conversation, because as a district, Benton is listed. If you go to the Iowa Digital Learning Plan, you can see highlights from districts all across the state. And I remember posing to the group, like, oh, I have a really good example of that, but it's in one classroom in one of our buildings. It's really more of a pocket of excellence instead of a systematic approach. And they said, Anna, that exists everywhere. So it's okay, to celebrate that pocket of excellence. So that's exactly what we did when we pulled this digital learning team together at the district level. We said, what are those pockets of excellence that are happening in your classrooms, in your buildings, throughout our district that you know about because you have done them, because you've heard about them, because it's your teaching partner doing it, because it's your child's teacher pursuing that pocket of excellence, whatever it may be. And they really helped us just generate a list and identify what was going well in the area of digital learning throughout the district. It was also a really great formative assessment for Lynn and I to see where teams or different people on our team were at, what they thought was a pocket of excellence, and what for them, for each other, to know what each other thought was considered a pocket of excellence. Because I think one thing that teachers do pretty commonly is that they assume what they're doing is normal, that what they're doing is something that everyone else is doing. They don't necessarily acknowledge or recognize that what they're doing is actually extraordinary.
So it really became a little bit of a reflection, but a celebration of what was going on really, really well. And so as part of that, we had them amplify their stories. We as educators, sometimes we get into our little pocket, and like Anna said, we begin to think only in our own context and not realizing and recognizing the extraordinary things that we do, but also, unfortunately, because sometimes we are in our own environment, in our own world on a day-to-day basis, we oftentimes don't get that opportunity to see what others are doing. And so this was really a way to start building a conversation about a community of excellence. So with that, we've given you the full access to all of our agendas, so I won't take you through every single one. But we really, really wanted to be intentional about how we structured our time and how we started the learning experience and engaged in the conversation in order to be able to move forward in the work. But part of that couldn't just be us conversing. It was also about extending the learning.
Yeah, and like Lynn said, about every time we got together, we had about 3 hours in person. And in a district set up like Benton is, we depend on Zoom for collaboration on the regular. So for example, Tuesday morning at 7:30, every Tuesday my teachers throughout the district are Zooming, working through the data teams process because we're so spread out. So we did have some Zoom sessions with our team, but when we got together face to face, we really knew we needed to make the most of that time. And I don't know about districts that you're all serving, but at Benton Community it is as hard as ever to find subs. So when I go to building principals and say, I need this team together for half a day, they're like, oh my gosh, you got to make the most of it, Anna, because I don't know if I can find subs all that many more times. So when we were together, we knew that we had to be really intentional and planful for whatever activity we were engaging that group in to build capacity in them. One of those ways that we work to build capacity in them is to bring them here to ITech. We didn't put a lot of parameters on their visit to ITech. We said, hey, a lot of them, it was their first time ever attending this conference. We said, hey, go learn about what you can, what feeds your interest and desires professionally and personally, and then just be prepared to share whatever it is that you learn. We took notes on a shared document so people could see what each other were going to learn about, but I didn't say you need to go and learn about this, this, and this. We left it pretty wide open because we knew that that would best represent the district as a whole.
Okay, real quick, we had a question in the back.
So, two things. First of all, did you meet during the day?
Yes.
Did you meet after? Okay, so during the day. And did they get a stipend for doing this?
No, because it was during the contract day, it was something that they're already paid for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And we're
two
pretty
questions.
intentional about that just because a lot of the teachers on this team are also serving as coaches or sponsors of activities. And we didn't want to leave those teachers out or disinclude them from the conversation just because they're serving our kids in other capacities. So we absolutely had to meet during the day, but it also took care of not having to provide an additional stipend for the work.
Thank you.
Excellent question. And definitely feel free if you've got a question, if you want to stop us. Anna and I are very formal all the time, you can tell. So by all means, just shout out.
So when we talked, Lynn and I talked about the digital learning plan, I was like, gosh, I'm sure much like all of you in the districts that you serve, when I came to Benton, I student taught at Benton, and then I went away and taught for another district, and I just remember my first homecoming. Probably sounds silly, but I sat in the bleachers and I cried a little bit because I was like, these people love their school so much. And really it's all tied to their Bobcat wheel, their mission and vision. And our mission and vision. I just wanted to be a part of that culture and feel so grateful every day that I get to be. On the right, you can see that this is our Bobcat wheel. This is what it means to be a Bobcat. This is what being a Bobcat is all about when we think about skills and things like that we want to build within our students, but also the way that adults need to behave. Those expectations for excellence, that caring and belonging culture that we're constantly working on building and monitoring that continuous growth and really all grounded in teamwork because we're in it together. But when we talked about the structure for the digital learning plan, we talked about how much those 6 spokes of that Bobcat wheel that were designed or laid out in the 90s, but still really hold true today, timeless. When we think about the universal constructs, you can make very clear connections to the universal constructs and the spokes of that Bobcat wheel. The language might not be exactly identical in all of the spokes, but the idea is absolutely the same. And so when we talked about the structure for our digital learning plan, Lynn and I had a lot of back and forth conversation and asked for feedback from the team about, you know, using that structure from the Iowa digital learning plan, like let's not reinvent the wheel if something's already been figured out, but also how do we tie in those beliefs that we hold as Bobcats? Because at the end of the day, you know, I can preach and preach and preach and preach about why digital learning is important for our students, but at the end of the day, when you get hired as a Bobcat, this is what you're expected to adopt as beliefs. And so I needed to take what we knew was best practice in the area of digital learning and tie it to a belief system that you are absolutely expected to hold as a Bobcat. So that's exactly what we did in our digital learning plan. We took those best practices, we took that framework from the Iowa digital learning plan and tied it to those spokes, that belief system that every Bobcat, whether you're a Bobcat parent or you're a Bobcat student or you're a Bobcat teacher, is expected to hold and adopt.
And of course, my word that I maybe abused just a little bit is intentionality. And so my heart was singing because not only with the Bobcat spokes, you think about that's what they live and breathe and that's expected of them, but it also aligns really nicely with the 4 C's. And so when Anna really talked about that intentionality of not making this a separatist conversation, I was like, yes, because it shouldn't be. It should not be a separate conversation. It needs to be very much tied to the conversation and what is happening on a day-to-day basis in the classrooms. And so we wanted to be super intentional about making sure that there was that direct alignment and we were explicit about making those connections regularly.
I think the other really key piece about that intentionality and not making it feel like one more thing is this was my first year in the position that I held in the district, and the perception held by others was that I was absolutely a champion of digital learning and technology. I've been to iTech many times and people knew about it. I talked about technology in my classroom often. And so I needed to be really intentional about not making it look like I was throwing one more thing on a teacher's plate in my first year or my first 3 months on the job, right? And so that intentionality just became really even more important for me personally, because I knew that if I made teachers feel like I was putting one other separate thing on their plate, that was going to be pushed out by them sooner rather than later.
So as we started crafting, Anna and I did the writing, but it was done with the constant input from that digital learning team. So they helped us with every single step of the way. They helped us identify exactly what our indicators were going to be. They helped us identify what those look-fors might be. So Anna and I did the work of writing, but it was with their input and constantly resurfacing and taking things back. So one of the things that we did as we went through, once again, that intentionality of making sure that there was that direct alignment between the spokes of the Bobcat wheel and these components that we were crafting in the digital learning plan, but also wanting to be very explicit of what does this look like in action for students and teachers. So as we went through, we had a descriptor, but we didn't feel like that was enough. We wanted to give people some ideas, some exemplars of what that actually would look like.
Yeah, so like Lynn said, we broke that down into we really took the teaching and learning sections, combined them and made subsections around those 4 C's, or the spokes of the Bobcat wheel. And so we really broke them down into what students can use digital tools for, or to become effective communicators, because that was the spoke in this example, and what teachers can use digital tools to enhance effective communication by. So like Lynn said, we wanted to be really explicit and specific, so that way teachers would actually use the document, because we knew that if we made it really heavy with ed jargon and things like that, then teachers would not read that entire paragraph or that entire page of content.
Give me an example of what explicitly you said this is what one of our goals are.
Yep, so, and all of those are listed in the plan, but for example, students can use digital tools to become effective communicators by connecting to other learners, to access information and share ideas, capturing and sharing their learning, receiving feedback from others. We took, in a minute we'll show you, we took that explicitness one next step farther to share local stories or pockets of excellence. that were examples of this spoke of the wheel. The other reason that Lynn and I had to do the writing of the content was exactly what we talked about earlier. There were not subs available to pull teachers in and have them help us do the writing. The other component to that is it would have taken us a really, really long time if we would have had teachers help with all of that writing piece. I mean, Lynn and I spent a lot of time together working through that, muddling through that. But again, like she said, we asked for a lot of input and we didn't publish anything without a lot of feedback.
So one of the things that we really wanted to take from the digital learning plan, the powerful piece, is that it's a story. It's the story of what was happening and what we wanted to see happen in Benton community. And so with the Iowa Digital Learning Plan, there are highlighted stories that amplify what this looks like in action. So we took that same idea for each of the different components. So when you think about effective communicators and you think about all of these different things that we were featuring and we were talking about, we took it, like Anna said, that one step further of not just saying, okay, these are indicators of what you could look for, but this is what it looks like in action with our students here at Benton Community.
This is probably by far my favorite part of our digital learning plan, are those local Bobcat stories of what is a really clear, solid example of this spoke of the Bobcat wheel in action when it comes to digital learning at Benton Community. So this story, for example, on the right is about our tag teacher using Flipgrid with students and a group of students from a completely another district and how they did book talks back and forth, essentially just communicating about different elements of the story that both teachers had collaboratively designed for their students. This is probably, I would say, well, we have data, we have evidence to confirm that this is our teachers' favorite part of the story as well, or the digital learning plan as well. They have shared that the stories are what they really like to read in the digital learning plan, because not only does it make them feel good about what's going on in our district, and because our district is set up the way it is, it's hard for our teachers to even see each other very often or get in each other's buildings very often. So it gave them a really clear picture of what happens in the area of digital learning in each other's buildings, but it also gave them a person to ask, and a person that they felt like was really doing the work. Because from the seat that I sit in as an administrator, sometimes teachers don't want to hear my example or hear an example that I might have to offer. They want to hear from someone else in the trenches like they are. So that was another really big success when it comes to this work, just because there were other teachers that teachers could then go ask as internal experts. We were also really intentional about asking a variety of teachers for stories. We're also really intentional about not just asking for stories that felt like really big culminating projects. We asked for stories that teachers would or could do to integrate digital learning on the daily. Not just a project that might take 6 weeks to complete.
So the thing is, we didn't want this just to be this document that, you know, we put all this time and effort and energy in, and it like didn't go anywhere. It sat on this lovely shelf or on some website, and nobody ever looked at it and you know, knew it was there. We really wanted this to become a part of the conversation. I feel like I'm using that phrase like ad nauseum at this point, but we really wanted it to be part of the living, breathing fabric of what people were doing in their everyday practice. And so this digital learning team, they knew that part of their work was continuing to go out and to share the work that we were doing, to highlight, to identify those exemplars, but also to lead the conversation. And so with that in mind, we were building towards the unveiling of this digital learning plan.
The purpose of this video is to provide you with information regarding digital learning at Benton Community. The 4 C's are creativity, collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. This framework aligns with the mission and vision at Benton Community as defined by the Bobcat wheel. Bobcats are creative problem solvers, cooperative contributors, complex thinkers, self-directed learners, responsible citizens, and effective communicators.
Effective communicators share ideas, provide feedback, and challenge their thinking in order to better understand their thinking.
Complex thinkers can analyze and evaluate resources and information from multiple sources in multiple ways. They ask questions, consider multiple perspectives, and utilize information to construct new ideas.
Self-directed learners own their own learning. They are active participants in all parts of the learning process. Self-directed learners identify their personal learning needs and preferences, as well as identify ways to share their learning.
Creative problem solvers see the world in new and different ways. They identify problems, they seek information, adjust their thinking, and build upon their experiences as they work to find solutions that have positive impacts on the future.
Cooperative contributors will work with others to construct, build upon, and exchange ideas. They work with others to complete tasks, provide feedback, and challenge thinking.
Responsible digital citizens are similar to responsible citizens in that they show respect for others and respect for themselves when they are online. Some things that fall into this category are intellectual property, so that would include things like not plagiarizing, not using music or images that you don't have permission to use, and you respect copyright. Another is to honor perspectives, so perspectives of other people who are giving information and other viewpoints without attacking. And so students need to learn how you communicate and give feedback to each other in an effective way that doesn't hurt each other's feelings or put down each other's ideas. And then the last one is privacy, how to protect their own privacy and to respect the privacy of others when they are online.
For professional learning on January 2nd, we will come together for learning opportunities around digital learning and how it is connected to the spokes of the Bobcat wheel. We will also share the Benton Community Digital Learning Plan. As you prepare for this day, please look over your schedule. It is color-coded by the spokes of the Bobcat wheel. Think about what you'd like to explore further. We look forward to seeing you on January 2nd at 7:30 at the middle school, high school.
Okay, before we go any further, I just have to highlight that my amazing cinematography skills, this was very in-house. We sat them in front of a green screen and dropped it in. You'll notice that, I love Jen. She wrote her stuff on her hand. There were others that, we wanted this to be true and authentic and not actually feel like very produced. We wanted it to be them and their voices. So you'll notice there's imperfections in the video. We were good with that, and we wanted that because it was really them telling the story.
I think the other thing that I didn't mention before, when thinking about if this is a process you choose to try and replicate in your district, when thinking about that team, it's also really important that you consider people within your district that have social capital. And I talked earlier about when identifying the members of that team, we talked about champions of technology and resistors of technology. We also thought really intentionally about people with social capital. If so-and-so said this, could it carry? Would it carry? And to what audience? And so just know that that was a really important component of our success, is because the members of our team had social capital within the buildings and contents in which they serve.
So we wanted this to be very visible. So not only was it shared with the staff, but it is actually also published on the district website. But we wanted it to be a living, breathing document that we constantly revisited. But with all of that being said, the revisiting was super intentional. So you noticed that the members of the digital learning team talked about this big kickoff event on January 2nd. So that was part of the intentional rollout of how were we going to make this really truly something that people revisited, that guided their work, guided their conversations.
And this slide is as linked, I think, as heavily as what we could possibly make it. But at the end of the day, as Director of Curriculum and Instructional Services, I'm responsible for all of the PL that happens throughout the district. And this is my jam. This is my favorite part, beyond creating the actual document, but what is it going to look like to share about the work with adults in order to positively impact students. So like Lynn said, we had a very intentional whole group presentation at the start of one of our full days of PL. And that digital learning team that was in that video, they did the speaking. The last thing teachers want is me up on the stage again talking to them. So we were really intentional about having the digital learning team doing the sharing, because like I said before, they're the people with social capital. They're the people that when someone's on the stage, when they're on the stage, people in the audience will listen. We took that another step further and broke teams up into breakout sessions where they could choose, teachers could choose where they wanted to go. Now, those members of that digital learning team led some of those breakout sessions. Sometimes they emailed the presenter that they visited at ITech and said, hey, I'm going to lead a session in the district. I went to your ITech session. I learned a great deal from you. May I use your information and to share at the district level? That was absolutely some of those sessions. But if you click on that breakout session link, it'll show you that we broke every single session down by the spokes of the Bobcat wheel, essentially those 4 C's again. We had people from the community come, we had people from Grant Wood come, we had people from Central Rivers come and present. So business people came to present to our staff, again, all focused on what does digital learning look like tied to the spokes of the wheel. Because remember, the spokes of the wheel are what you're expected to adopt as a belief system as a Bobcat. So we knew that when we talked about digital learning, again, to not make it feel like something extra or this new plan that this team just talked about, it had to be woven into the belief system that we hold as Bobcats. So we had, like I said, some members from some outside agencies come and help our digital learning team present. We did about a half day, fed them a lot, early and midday, snacks in the middle, and it really just was a very iTech-esque like environment. It was pretty informal, lots of networking, and it was the first day back to work after Christmas break. And I don't know if all of you remember what last January was like, but it was absolutely wonderful way to spend a day together where people were networking, talking about a bowl game and things like that, but also just talking about how does this impact our student experience here at Benton. They then, after that, those breakout sections went back into their CLDTs and had a collaborative learning meeting on what does this look like in my classroom? What might this look like? What did I learn? What do I want to implement immediately? What do I need more support in implementing? And like I said, I don't know if any of you remember what last winter was like, but it got really hairy for those of us around the state when it comes to getting school days in. At Benton Community, we had 10 straight days of snow days. And at one point, our superintendent and I were the only 2 in the office because it was a snow day. And we were talking about, okay, what are we going to do? Because the weather doesn't look like it's getting any better. And I said to him, could we have a virtual professional learning day? He said, Gary, I think I can create some really valuable content around some really, immediate skills that teachers need or information that teachers need and make it a little bit more flexible for people so that way we're not here until June 15th. And he said, Anna, go for it. So what I did is I built a Google Classroom for our teaching staff around the digital learning plan. So within that Google Classroom, teachers were given time to really read different parts of the digital learning plan, look through different parts of the Iowa digital learning plan, watch some videos put together by Iowa Public Television to support that mindset, that building capacity in all of our teachers about what digital learning looks like in actions, and see model examples from different areas of the state. They were also expected to then take what they had learned in that digital learning plan and write a lesson that was led with the standard and learning targets, and write a lesson that connected a digital learning component that they just read about in the plan, and then submit their lesson. I gave feedback on all of their lessons. Another expectation on that day of digital learning, focused on digital learning, the virtual professional development day, was that they wrote essentially like a book review of the digital learning plan to give feedback to that digital learning team about what they liked, what they thought maybe needed to be adjusted. If they felt like they had a plan or a story that they could submit to that digital learning team to have added to the plan, those were all parts of our digital learning virtual day. The other really key piece for us when we offered that virtual professional development day was there was someone connected, either a teacher leader or an administrator, connected to a Zoom link the entire contract day. So our contract day at Benton is 7:30 to 3:30. So there was constantly either an administrator or an instructional coach, and most of the time there was at least one administrator and at least one instructional coach on the Zoom at the same time all day long, that teachers could then click on that Zoom link and access and ask questions in real time. Now we got a lot of questions and feedback via text, via email, but there were teachers who logged onto that Zoom link and said, I need help brainstorming this part of my lesson. I learned this, this, and this in the digital learning plan, and I want to build this, this, and this into my lesson. Can you talk me through it? So all day long, there was someone in real time that they could connect with. Now I'm going to tell you, because we were on like day 8 of snow days, there were some teachers who got on and they're like, I just need to talk to another adult. My kids are driving me nuts. We haven't been out of the house for a really long time. And so that was a real thing about that Zoom link. But again, we were just trying to model what best practices are in integrating digital tools into the learning and experience. The other thing is, we had a lot of secondary teachers especially who had utilized Google Classroom for years in their classrooms, but had never been a student in a Google Classroom. So some of the feedback that we got from that experience was, I had never seen it from the student side. I'd only ever seen it from the teacher side, so it was also really beneficial for those teachers who had utilized Google Classroom for years and years and years to utilize it, like I said, as a student instead of as the teacher of that Google Classroom.
So we got some amazing feedback in general on the digital learning plan and on the opportunity, modeling best practice, like Anna said. So it was definitely an affirmation that we were headed in the right direction, but the work is not done. It's continuing because we said we did not want this to become this shelved document. We wanted it to be a living, breathing document that was constantly part of the woven fabric of the Benton community practice. And so we are continuing this work. It's not finished, and that team knows it's not finished, but there's also kind of the next steps in the evolution. So with our couple minutes that we have, as we look through, one of the big things that Anna and I talked about is actually going a little bit deeper into that teaching and learning component. And so there's lots of different pieces of the Benton digital learning plan, but we felt like obviously the teaching and learning one was where we could have the biggest impact. And so we are continuing those conversations by diving into that instructional opportunity to craft learning experiences that truly honor all learners and thinking with intentionality. So our work this year is now kind of laying a foundation. We're not quite going full on with talking to the staff about UDL and accessibility, but we're laying the foundation through the conversation of the digital learning plan and Bobcat Wheel and the MTSS process. And so we're layering all of these pieces together because we want it to be part of that bigger conversation.
So we have a team here today who's learning all about, they very intentionally are going to sessions around UDL and accessibility. Again, like Lynn said, build capacity.
The other piece is the constant submission of stories and seeking out those amplifying pockets of excellence so that it's spreading and we're honoring and highlighting all of the amazing things that truly are happening across the entire district. Yes, ma'am.
Can I talk about the team that went about, like, is it just those teachers and that we are seeing, just those 6 or 7 that were on your team, or how many were on the team?
Yep, so it was primarily those 6 or 7 teachers that were on the team. Those aren't the only people that we asked for stories from. They went out and solicited stories, so they were, I would say, the building reps or the grade level or content reps that then went to, they did the work of the team, but then went to share with their buildings. So more of like a liaison to people. And again, some of that just came down to logistics. Sometimes if a team gets too big, and we talked a lot very intentionally about size of the team and things like that, but we knew we needed to get the work done or to do the work. And sometimes when a team gets too large, that becomes a challenge. And so that's kind of how we formed that team.
So it seemed like the Bobcat Wheel was really the foundation of all of the conversations. If a district hasn't moved to create, most districts have a mission or a vision statement, but really haven't set that foundation around here are the priorities, here are kind of our big targets. Would you suggest a district start there before heading into a digital learning plan? It seems like that was really kind of where everything fed back to.
You know, I think that you could do the work without that big rock, but at the end of the day, I'll tell you that big rock, having that already established, made this work so much easier because, again, that didn't feel like one other thing that we were tagging on to teachers. It was just part of the way we do business and what we believe as Bobcats. And so if you don't have that deeply rooted mission or vision, that doesn't mean that the work couldn't happen because, you know, as much as I'd like to say that we thought about the connection to the Bobcat Wheel right at the beginning, we didn't. You know, it took Lynn and I some back and forth and collaborative time together to really make all of those clear connections between the spokes of the wheel and the work that we knew we were trying to accomplish. But again, having that big rock, that Bobcat Wheel, the mission vision that we could tie everything back to, just made it not feel like one more thing and part of why we're doing this.
Yeah, but your mission wheel is the 4 C's, right?
It's very connected to the 4 C's. There are a lot of parallels. We have 6 spokes.
So you use clarity, which covers the 4 C's quite nicely, right? So did your teachers have a good understanding of that, or is that something you introduced to your team, was the clarity data and covering the 4 C's that way? Was it kind of a learning curve for them a bit, or not?
Well, we were pretty intentional about how we broke down the Bright Bites data. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, so the Bright Bites data breaks it down into the 4 C's for us, and we could see pretty clearly that in no way did the Bright Bites data make us feel like we were broken, but we absolutely had areas to grow. And that's the 4 C's was the area to grow. I think some teachers came to the table and they were like, I want to really grow in the area of whatever device is connected to because I'm coming to this table because I want to talk about devices. And when we looked at the data and talked about how our conversation is not going to be about devices because the data tells us it doesn't need to be. The data's,